Duelists, I'm tired, but that's only because I've spent 20 hours watching YCS Pittsburgh this past weekend, and I'm also very happy, and I want to talk about that. A little bit of a YCS recap, current format discussion, you know, did the emergency ban list do anything? Was there still floodgating going on? How is the turn skip situation? Because that's one of the most asked questions that people had when they joined my chat over the course of the weekend. People kept asking, you know, how's this YCS so far? How is the gameplay and so on and so forth? And while not everything was perfect, and we will talk about that, there are still some offenders left in the format that I hope that will get solved in future ban lists. I want to start off by saying that this YCS Pittsburgh, I felt to me like night and day when it comes to the quality of games between YCS Anaheim and this one. It was a lot better. It was very, very good compared to what happened at YCS Anaheim. A lot less turn skips, and even though most of the decks that we saw were the same or very similar, we're going to talk about that too, current format and stuff like that, but you know, we saw Mitsuyami, we saw Pure Mitsu, we saw Draco Tail, we saw K9 variants, even K9 Crystron still doing okay, some Malice here and there. Going to get into that more in a second, but the gameplay has changed, and that's important. There's just more Yu-Gi-Oh being played, you know, and we saw, of course, we saw Aditya win the YCS against John Wilkin in the finals. Once again, two great players in the finals, and this time we actually got some Yu-Gi-Oh in the finals, even though John lost the finals 2-0 with some, I would say, mediocre hands that the Mitsurugi Yami deck can sometimes produce. You know, it's a deck with a very high ceiling, but also a lot of engine requirements, and so John ended up hitting a little bit more on the engine requirement sort of, you know, the hands had like 2 or 3 engine requirements, I think, both times. But, you know, it also means Aditya was able to win the second game going second, which is not something that happened in YCS Anaheim pretty much at all. And in general, you know, this, of course, is subjective, but I enjoyed watching a lot of the Draco Tail gameplay that we saw over the course of the weekend. You know, the Draco Tail mirror that they played in top 4 was also pretty good. Once again, just in general, one thing I noticed with Draco Tail in the mix was that it going second was not as dooming in this YCS as it was in Anaheim, with no D barriers post side deck, and like just Draco Tail in general being a deck that plays into boards relatively well, but also going first doesn't set up a board that you have to automatically scoop against. You know, like for the most part, Draco Tail going first sets up boards like this one where you have like a Gulamel and then the Draco Tail traps, and that's basically it. Sometimes they open a branded fusion and then there's some branded disruptions next to it, but for the most part, usually whenever the Draco Tail players were going first at this YCS, it was worth it for the player going second to play into it, and sometimes they succeeded and sometimes they didn't, but for the most part, Yu-Gi-Oh was played, which is all I wanted. Draco Tail is not the only example. We saw some cool back and forth gameplay with the Mitsurugi Yami deck just being a very high ceiling deck going second into boards. I think the deck is not that fun when it goes first, but going second, it can actually play in, like, for example, I think we saw Lucas Sacco beat this Odeon Fiendsmith deck going second, I think both games, which I thought was pretty cool, and there was also no floodgates involved, so that was nice. And then also we had like Draco Tail versus Vanquish Soul K9 matchups over the course of the weekend that were also pretty cool back and forth. Here, I believe we saw, I think it was Vanquish Soul beating Draco Tail going second, even though Draco Tail had setup plus Nibiru, and then they beat them by playing into the board, and then at the very end they turned the Nibiru token to attack mode with Jiaolong and then attacked them with like a 12,000 attack Nibiru token. It was a pretty hype game, and this is just a few examples. I didn't, you know, I didn't want to bring up like every single match over the course of the weekend of a bunch of really good games. There was definitely more. And this time around, the floodgates that we are going to talk about in a second were the exception. And this was the rule. The normal games were the ones where people were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, there was times where people bricked, or people didn't draw well, or people set up a very strong board and stuff like that. You know, for the most part, that's Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's some mid-rangey decks, there's some very high power combo decks and stuff like that. But there wasn't as many turn skips. There was not even close to the same amount of non-games. And that is the first thing that I wanted to get out there before we talk about the format in a little bit more detail and what's going to happen moving forward and some of the floodgates that did happen, right? So that is that. Now, to just get those out of the way, the few things that did happen over the course of the weekend that were still that leave a little bit of a desire for future ban lists in me, you know. And this is besides, you know, they should hit Mitsurugi, they should hit Draco Tail, or they should hit K9 or whatever, you know. Like, of course, future ban lists are going to make adjustments to the archetypes in the metagame, but I'm talking about individual cards that were ruining individual games at this YCS. We saw a K9 deck, which by all means a pure K9 deck, which would be pretty cool, but they were doing a combo where they were using Scrap Recycler to send Spell Canceller, and then they would revive it with Imperial Princess Quinkry, which obviously was pretty annoying. I believe they did this in both Game 1 and Game 3 of this feature match against RB in round 4, and that was pretty cringe. So I hope that, I mean, it's either the Princess or the Spell Canceller that needs to go. I've heard a lot of people say that on the previous ban list that banning Mjolnir was not the right thing to do because there are replacements, and there are even replacements that you can give to your opponent that are not a full turn skip but are still a floodgate. I believe it's there's one of the what are they called? One of the incantations that is a level 5 that just says while you control it, you cannot special from the extra deck. So there's still the option to give that to your opponent, which is something that people in my chat have been mentioning over the course of the weekend. We didn't actually see it, but it just goes to show that Imperial Princess Quinkry does have the potential to be a problematic card in the future, and even is problematic right now because it's reviving Spell Canceller. We saw this in my opinion is the funniest and the saddest one at the same time, because this is Pure Mitsurugi using the water barrier statue. Now listen, okay, they banned Fossil Dyna because Mitsurugi was searching it with Gallant Granite. Then they also banned the Earth Barrier statue because, well, you can just search that instead of Fossil Dyna. So they banned that too. Great. They even went another step and banned the Fire Barrier statue because instead of making Gallant Granite, you could be making the Banshee, which searches a Pyro. So, you know, ban that one too. This Pure Mitsurugi deck, instead of making a rank 4 to search a barrier statue, makes a rank 8 with the Mitsurugi monsters, which makes the, I believe it's called Dragluxion, which is the Galaxy rank 8 that searches 7th Tachyon. And then 7th Tachyon reveals a level 4 water from your, or rank 4 water from your extra deck and searches the water barrier statue. Which, admittedly, that shit is funny, but also it just goes, just all the barrier statues, okay? 3 of them are banned, 3 of them are legal. It makes no sense. Obviously, these cards provide toxic gameplay. People are gonna find ways. Please get rid of all of them. This match wasn't even won by the barrier statue because they actually they bricked, they opened it, they just normal summoned it, they passed. Christian Urena was turn skipped by it, so they passed back. But then they like fumbled the OTK under they made an exceed with the barrier statue, and then they messed up the OTK and then they lost. But that's besides the point. That is 100% besides the point. These cards need to go. Thrust for Featherstorm, obviously. Featherstorm and Different Dimension Ground are the 2 most obvious replacements for Dimensional Barrier. They were not nearly as popular because not every deck can set them up, and not every single deck is weak to Different Dimension Ground, whereas basically every deck is weak to Dimensional Barrier. So they were not as popular and they weren't happening as often on stream, but I'm sure a lot of people played them, and I'm sure a lot of people had like at least 1 or 2 or 3 games throughout the weekend impacted by them, which is just not necessary. You know, it just doesn't need to happen. So you know, those cards also, they did show up. You know, I'm not gonna pretend like Dimensional Barrier ban was the end-all be-all solution to those normal trap cards from the side deck. There's a couple more that definitely need to go eventually, but that's the thing, right? That's why I'm not super unhappy about these cards showing up, because obviously they were going to show up. I'm not delusional, and the only way for them to ban them is if they show up and skip some turns, because, you know, apparently from YCS Anaheim, we've learned that if these cards show up and ruin some games on stream, there's a chance they get banned. So there you go. There's Featherstorm. I can see it. Get rid of it. Quackimero Drago was in some Draco Tail decks. They planned to summon it off Hieratic Seals of the Heavenly Spheres, but this one was also a hard draw Quackimero Drago, and they just normal summoned it, and it locks you out of summoning light and dark. well, special summon. And so Mitsurugi Yami here on the left was not able to summon a single monster from their hand, basically. I mean, they could normal summon Cupsy, but then, you know, it doesn't do anything. So the entire deck's Light and Dark, couldn't play, lost to the Kwakame Rodrigo, I believe, soon after. So a couple of examples. And then also there was the French Open happening at the same time, where we saw Malice side in Dimensional Fissure, basically, in one of the games. So a couple of games post-side still had these kind of cards show up. But overall, I would say we've gone from about like almost every second game being decided by some sort of turn skip in Anaheim to literally these, I think, are the only examples from the entire weekend that I was able to find and that I remembered from watching the entire thing. So I would say about like instead of 50% real Yu-Gi-Oh, we got like 90%, which is already a pretty good increase. Now I still wanted to bring up these examples because, you know, we got all the way up to 80 to 90%. I don't see a reason why we couldn't go all the way up to, you know, 90 plus and more. So I wanted to mention these cards because I have hope that what they did with the last ban list was so well received that we can go that extra step and also get rid of these cards. But yeah, overall pretty positive experience. So I want to take this moment real quick to just get some competitive content in here as well in terms of the decks and discussing the position in the format. The top 8 for YCS Pittsburgh consisted of 4 Mitsurugi Yami, 3 Draco Tail, and 1 Lunalight, which is a little light on the rogue side, but of course it is only 8 decks now in Top Cut instead of like 32 or 64 beforehand. So realistically, over the course of the weekend, we saw other decks doing well as well. They have the top 32 breakdown here on the YGO Pro deck side as well, where there was 2 Lunalight in top 32, 4 Malice, which I was surprised to see no Malice in top 8 because we saw a lot of Malice over the course of the weekend. But I believe there was 1 Malice player who ended up X2 and missed out on top 8, which is really sad. But, well, I mean, it's not sad because it's Malice, but it's sad because someone missed with 12 and 2, which is crazy. But yeah, we got very few pure Yummies. We got very few pure Mitsurugi. It seems like people just prefer to play the mix between the two, you know? Like, we got 7 Mitsurugi Yummies. We got some Banker Soul, some Sky Striker, which was cool. They were on feature as well. It was a really good match. Crystron and Gem Knight. So there is variety. They just didn't quite make it all the way into the top 8. Mitsurugi Yami and Draco Tail, expectedly the 2 big dogs of the current format, and I want to talk about the implications of that because this puts you in an interesting but also difficult spot as a deck builder because I feel like both of these decks are weak to different kind of cards. As an example, I think one of the main reasons why Aditya was so successful in this tournament was because he was playing a lot of cards that are really good. Like, cards that are good against Mitsurugi Yami include the Charmies. So in Aditya's winning deck list, there was all 9 Charmies between the main and the side deck because those cards are basically the only really good hand traps against Mitsurugi Yami because like the deck is a very high ceiling, high power deck, and it's hard to stop it with quote-unquote fair one-on-one interaction. Like, so cards like the Charmies and Droll, which are more impact, are really good against Mitsurugi Yami, and we also saw a decent amount of board breakers in other decks like Dark Ruler No More, and so on and so forth, which I believe is what John Wilkin was main decking as well. So you see a trend towards a lot of these more high impact cards. We see Fuva, Droll, Dark Ruler, and another Charmy here in the side deck as well. So the story checks out. A lot of high impact cards are needed to combat Mitsurugi Yami. At the same time, this is where Draco Tail comes in, and I believe this is why Draco Tail was able to win this YCS, is because Draco Tail is really good against these cards. Doesn't care about Droll much, doesn't care about Dark Ruler much, doesn't even care about Charmies much. Like, of course, a Fuva against the Branded Fusion is good, but it's not nearly as game-ending or turn-ending as it is against like a Yami Mitsu deck or something, you know? The Draco Tail deck can easily summon once or twice only, and then have a lot of non-engine and trap cards to back it up, and it's just fine, right? And that's why like Draco Tail is interesting in this environment, is because those kind of cards don't affect this as much. So you as a deck builder have to do the split between, you know, how much do I want to respect Mitsu Yami, or how much do I want to respect the other end of the spectrum, which is Draco Tail, which the cards that are good against Draco Tail are much simpler, much fairer interactions. Like you see cards like Ghost Spell, like Ash, like Double Cyclone in the side deck, which if you're wondering what they're using this card for, it's when you activate a spell card that they want to negate with Flame, you chain Double Cyclone, destroying your own spell and one of their other back rows, like Sting or Horn, and that way you basically trade 2 for 2 with their back row, but they also don't get the draw because Flame didn't negate your spell card, and your spell card also resolves, which is really good. So it's a very good card against specifically Draco Tail. But it would do nothing against Mitsuyami. You know, you're going to draw a Double Cyclone against the board of IP, Herald, Murakumo, Surprise, Trap card, and stuff like that. So you see what I mean, right? The cards that are good against these two archetypes are very different from each other. And that's the interesting question. How are you going to find a deck that does well into both kind of matchups? It's an interesting task. And I believe at the moment, only really Draco Tail is able to do this because Draco Tail has great synergy with the Charmies, but Draco Tail also has enough non-engine space to respect both decks. You know, Draco Tail is able to play like the Ash, Bell, and more for the mirror, and then also still have room for, you know, the Fuba, Droll, Nib, Charmies in the side and stuff like that. I guess a lot of decks can do this, but I suppose it is up to the player base to find a deck that is that can do that. Also, I think one of the most interesting things is like, how do you build a deck that works against both kinds of cards? Because people are playing both kinds of cards, right? You see all Charmies basically in most decks, but you also see like the Bells and the Ashes and the Nibirus and the Drolls and stuff. It's hard to find a deck that really functions in that environment. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of deck does that besides Draco Tail. I mean, Draco Tail has proven to be a deck that can function here. Draco Tail also, since we mentioned the French Open earlier, Draco Tail also won the French Open against Malice in the finals, which I guess the rise of Malice is also something to discuss. We don't have a deck list to look at right now because these haven't been posted yet, but there was 3 Malice decks in top 8 here at the French Open, as well as a couple of Malice decks doing well at YCS Pittsburgh. And I believe that is because Malice also checks some of those boxes. You know, Malice is historically pretty good against low impact hand traps. Malice is pretty good against Roland Lockbird. Malice, despite the fact that it is a combo deck, has some good lines under the Charmies. As long as you're not being hit with multiple Charmies, I think the deck is fine because you can easily set up like Cryptor and a trap and stuff. And you have strong non-engine and you draw some cards with Chessy Cat in the meantime and stuff like that. So it's decent into Charmies, good into Droll. Dark Ruler does nothing against it because the board is unbreakable if you make the full thing. And it plays really good non-engine in the current format. Right? Dominus Impulse is a premium card against Draco Tail and Mitsurugi. So Malice is well positioned, as much as I hate to say it. But it is getting to a point where people are expecting Malice again. So we did actually see some Lanceas over the course of the weekend, which I guess falls into the turn skip category a little bit. But people are considering playing Lancea again, and I can understand it. The problem is just like, how much do you want to respect Malice right now when the 2 main decks to worry about are Draco Tail and Mitsurugi Yami, but at the same time, Lancea also covers Lunalight, which is a deck that did top the YCS as well and is still being played, and Lancea is pretty good against it. So I could definitely see Lancea going back into some decks, but yeah. Interesting weekend, and that's my main takeaway from it. Let me know what you think of the format. Let me know what you think possible solutions are to this format. Currently, I can tell you from my perspective, YCS Bologna is coming up. I think Draco Tail is looking like a pretty strong option that I also personally really enjoy. So I could see myself playing Draco Tail at that tournament. But I'm also messing around with different Yami variations at the moment because they are decent into some of those non-engine cards, but not all of them. You know, Fuvalos is pretty good against Yami. And some of the board breakers that people play are pretty good against Yami. So gotta see where we go from here. But that's been my experience from YCS Pittsburgh. If you watched, then let me know what you felt about this YCS. Was it better in your eyes than YCS Anaheim? In my opinion, it surely was. So looking forward to YCS Bologna, looking forward to exploring this format a little bit more, and then looking forward to the new sets coming out in the upcoming months to shake things up a little bit, and eventually also a ban list that should be happening at some point to handle mainly Mitsurugi and maybe the Mitsurugi Yami bridges, but that's a topic for a different day. For now, Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the YCS in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as always. I appreciate you guys for getting me close to 100k subscribers. Hopefully we can get that at some point in the near future. I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.